Hey there, friends. This is a good old fashioned impromptu, not scripted ramble, you could call it. I'd say tightly bouncing around in a system, like this dome is part of the system. This is on Long Beach and was built originally to house the Spruce Goose, the Howard Hughes monster airplane made out of spruce. And there's some pictures here. I wonder if that'll blow up a bit. See, there's the dome. It looks like they're raising it up in order to put the plane in, but that's not actually what they're doing. They're just leaving a bunch of the side open so they can slide it in. The Spruce Goose. Now that's the Queen Mary parked alongside. That too has been a tourist attraction, but I'm not sure how touristy it is today. I feel out of date. I've heard rumors that it's not, it's turning into more of a hulk, and maybe you're not supposed to go on board. I don't know. Leave your feedback in the comments if you like about what's going on with this ship. And the Spruce Goose is long gone, right? Where did it go? It went to McMinnville, right up here in Oregon, and is at a space museum, not a flight museum, more than a space museum nearby in Newburgh. Now, there's also a McMinnville's Hotel there, which has a UFO festival. And I'm thinking you do need to tie into UFOs at some point as a meme, just to be fluent with culture. So I'm thinking UFO festivals where we actually celebrate. And of course, there's the Subgenius link right there. You've seen my Bob Dobbs icon, perhaps. It's not mine, but the clip art culture allows me to use it. Copy left, Bob Dobbs, Subgenius. They have X Day, which is kind of mocking of the UFOs in a way, but poking fun is a legitimate way of expressing, you could say, religious sentiments. Don't take humans too seriously, especially when it comes to their dogmas. Now, this is a channel where we do get into some heavy math. Not really heavy, actually, pretty light, but math nonetheless. And so, scrolling in front of your eyes is a program that actually gets quite a bit longer behind the scenes, but I do share it on GitHub. It's all open source for talking to a ray tracer, POV ray, which has been around for a long time. And I want the right brain visualization approach to math. So, where I start out in giving the philosophy behind all of this writing is with what I'm pushing back against to some degree. In other words, now there's a POV ray rendering here. So imagine being in middle school and learning about a rotation matrix and how you can apply that to a vector and how you can make that vector spin around, or you can do it to all the vectors in a polyhedron. And my polyhedrons are defined in terms of edges which connect the endpoints of vectors. My vectors all start with a tail at the origin, right? So the vectors fan out from the origin, and these red edges would be defined by pairs of vectors. And I have a whole polyhedron class written in Python built on that premise. And then there's code for talking to POV ray in scene description language about what it is it should show. So that's a whole dimension you wouldn't see in high school. I said middle school, but it's an accelerated curriculum. It's just coming to a close. People are graduating. So that was a good experience for me. And there's other material about that at my websites. So the thing that's a little different than getting into 3D rendering, in addition to that, is I get into 3D rendering with a subject in mind, in other words, a topic in mind, which is the CCP, cubic closest packing of spheres. This is a very mainstream topic in a number of disciplines. Let's start with crystallography, but by extension, therefore, chemistry. Talk about Linus Pauling, as more of Oregon history, because I mentioned Newburgh, McMinnville. Let me talk about Linus Pauling from time to time, who discovered the geometry of nature. We can give him that. Even though Bucky is ridiculed sometimes for saying he discovered the geometry of nature. It's the same geometry. Nature is nature. And if you go to the Linus Pauling archives at OSU, you will see hands-on models that look very much like other models of nature, right? CCP, that's what we're talking about. But to access the spheres in the cubic close packing, I use an odd, you could say odd because unfamiliar, let's say alien coordinate system. You could say this looks barycentric, whatever. What to get about this picture is the vectors tail originate as they would in a methane molecule at the center. The 4 vectors go to these 4 corners, but then the edges are what we want to be either 1 or 2, depending if we're measuring in radii, sphere radii, or sphere diameters. So you can see how spheres packed together in the CCP, right? If you take any 4 of them that are interadjacent, touching each other, those would define our unit volume. So unit volume tetrahedron, we get to this whole set of XYZ coordinates that correspond to the ABCD coordinates of quadrats. We map out the 12 directions to the 12 balls around a center ball, and then we can go out layer by layer. That's what you see in that chart. So there's another layer added. This is 1, 2, 3 frequency, we say. Count the intervals between the balls. 4 frequency. And this is all rendered, right? This is like POV ray rendering these pictures. They're not photographs of plastic balls, although they kind of look that way. So what are we doing? We are incorporating this ability to do kind of cool graphics into a high school curriculum, and it feels a little bit like shop class or a vocational subject, right? It feels like mechanical drawing, what we used to call mechanical drawing. It doesn't feel super highbrow. It's not super abstract. We're not trying to be the next Einstein here. We're just trying to get fluent with tools of the trade. I think a lot of people don't push POV ray at the high school level, not because there's anything wrong with it. It's just that it's free and open source. And if you're a major textbook publisher, you're in competition with all this colorful interactive stuff like I'm doing here. You're doing the thick doorstop books. They may have a fair amount of color in them, but they're very expensive, and you've got this scheme going with so-called public schools, which are in cahoots to not teach any of this Martian math Bucky stuff because it's too off the beaten track, and they really march to the orders of their superiors, not based on mathematical merit, really. Because this stuff has some importance in history, right? The Bucky stuff that's linked to the industry messed up. Like Boeing is not making mass housing, right? We left that to Airstream and to the mobile home community to solve the housing crisis, right? That didn't have to be. I mean, they could still exist, but there could be alternatives. And I'm not just talking about domes. I'm talking about more like yurts hanging on a utility pole. I'm talking about using the aerospace level technology that we have today, which is even higher than what Bucky had to work with, and he already did proof of concept. People criticize him for not going all the way and becoming like an Elon Musk type multi-billionaire and produce his dome, like he's some kind of big daddy who's going to take care of us, but I'm glad he didn't, because this thing had to be sustainable and it had to have a large capital base in terms of brain power behind it, not just one guy who could then take the fall when it failed and be the ultimate scapegoat. So I'm glad Bucky did not risk putting his name to any particular aerospace housing model. Humans weren't ready, they weren't mature enough, and they still aren't, obviously, if you just look around. It's kind of pathetic. And part of the reason is because math teachers are in cahoots to suppress a curriculum of tomorrow. They want to keep you, the younger folk, under their control and therefore not aware of things that they are not aware of. Like, don't teach things other math teachers can't teach. Of course, they could easily with a little bit of training. All of this stuff is free open source, like I say, and I'm using state-of-the-art tools that are free and open source, like SymPy, NumPy, Pandas, and of course, Jupyter Notebook. So it's not like any of this is out of range. It's just there's kind of a lazy complacency that goes with feeling like you're on top of the heap. And why should I change when I'm doing well? Is the thought process of someone who maybe isn't doing so well at this point because the economy is kind of going down and there's some like places where we could grab a hold and maybe pull ourselves back up again, but it would require some awareness of history. And history is something people like to turn their backs on quite a bit. They talk about United States of amnesia, right? So who is Bucky Fuller? How does he connect to the Spruce Goose? How does this connect to the Queen Mary? How does any of this stuff connect? That requires some exploration. So I invite you to join me on that path, explore, read about and study the history of activists, because Fuller was an activist and worked with other activists such as Kiyoshi Kirimiya. And he was also a subversive. Why? Why do I say that? What makes Bucky subversive? You tell me. It's all on this channel. It's like a quiz. But if you don't know by now, and you claim to be a high school teacher, aren't you missing critical cultural literacy skills? I'm asking. It's a question. All right. Talk to you more soon.